So, good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening, depending on what time you're listening to this recording. And I am back, and I will be with you for some of your modules on microeconomics, particularly on the demand and on the interaction between supply and demand, which we will get to later on. For the time being, for this module that we are currently dealing with right now, we'll be talking about demand. So for this particular lectures slides that you have right now with you, I'll be giving you an introduction to what is microeconomics and a little bit of introduction to demand. So this is demand part one. And our background for today is Mount Taranaki in New Zealand. It's a beautiful mountain. Haven't been there personally, but the picture looks nice. And particularly, what I want you to draw your attention to are the cows. So basically, this is what we'll be talking about. We'll be using the example of cow's milk to illustrate demand throughout this entire module on demand. Okay, so let's get the ball rolling then. All right, so let's start off with a short recap on basically what is economics. And because it's probably some time ever since I've done one of these recorded lectures, remember the note icon means the scroll icon means this notes. And again, I provided filled in notes and blank notes. So in case you want to fill it in yourselves, in case that helps you to remember these things while we're having the lecture, feel free to do so. And or if you just want to have the filled in notes, that's also fine as well. So let's just have a recap on economics. So this is the same definition I've given before in the production module. So basically, economics is all about the study of scarcity, right? It's all about asking ourselves, how do we allocate resources to meet the needs and wants of society? Now, in classical economics, and this is something I hope has been taught already, but I'm just going to reiterate this point. In classical economics, we assume that agents, so when we say agents, that means actors, right? So people, firms, companies, corporations, households, and all of that, basically everyone who participates in economics, we assume they're rational. So when we say rational, we mean that they're self-interested, not selfish. Okay, so self-interested, that they have the best intentions not only for themselves but for their loved ones as well, and they act in accordance to that. So basically the stuff that they do makes sense. So these are the this is the big assumption that we'll be having today, because there will be times when this assumption does not hold. Okay, but for now we will assume all agents are rational, and this will be true for the rest of the microeconomics course. So the question is, how do we approach economics then? What approach do we have then to study how we allocate resources to meet the needs and wants of society? Well, we got two approaches, all right? So we can look at this from a very small scale, and we can look at this from a very large scale. So the first approach is a very small scale. So imagine here again, so you've got your consumer over here, and then you've got the store that supplies the good over here. So this is the same as production, right? So the store or the firm produces a good which is consumed by the consumer, and then the consumer pays money to the firm in order as compensation. Now, in the first approach to economics, we ask the question: how much of the good should be produced, and how much do we pay for that amount of production? So this is the basic question of the first approach. And this approach is what we call microeconomics. Micro meaning small, because we look in at very specific example. We look at a very specific scale, the small scale, where we basically have the interaction between one person to one firm. And by the way, you could also think of this as entire markets, right? As long as we're still dealing with one good. So you can have the entire market for milk in a country, and that would still count as this first approach because we're dealing only with one kind of good. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now, the second approach takes a larger view towards this. So instead of just having one customer, we now have several customers. We now have families. We now have households to consider. And we take that all in aggregate. And also, not only do we have more people, more consumers, of course, we also have more producers, more firms. So this could be factories we include office spaces, and of course, we also include government. Okay, so in this second approach to economics, we now zoom out and look at society as a whole. And of course, because we got more we've got more producers, we'll be having more goods. And now the goods not only are being bought, they can also be traded abroad, overseas, or across a country, either through shipping or through train. And of course, money also increases, and now we've got whole markets, right? So we've got now the stock market coming in, we've now got credit coming in, all of these financial instruments have come in. So this is a second approach to economics. Furthermore, this second approach not only covers production in that large sense and how it interacts, but we also see different actors at play, and at a much larger scale. So first of all, again, I've mentioned we've got the government. So the government comes in and sets policy, sets laws, which is represented by this icon, and so that's part of it. We've also got shipping, either through freight or through airplanes, and of course, it's a global kind of approach because now we're looking at this from the whole. And so this is the second approach to economics, all right? So we got two approaches again. We've got one from a very specific small scale approach, and we got one from a very large scale approach. And this larger scale approach, this is where we talk about policy, where we talk about rules of the game and all of that. And so again, that's the larger approach to it. So in summary, a smaller approach is what we call microeconomics. Okay, so these deal with, again, specific firms or specific markets. Let's say the market for milk. So that's one good. It can even be even more specific than that, and just consider the interaction between a household and a firm. So that's all under microeconomics. Whereas macroeconomics concerns itself with, again, government when it comes to policy, laws, and all of that. And it could also be international scale. It doesn't have to be international. It usually is. Okay, so this is what we talk about. And microeconomics is usually the kind of economics that most of us are familiar about, like buzzwords like fiscal policy or monetary policy, government spending, GDP, GNP. That's all part of macroeconomics. However, our focus this term is on microeconomics, and you'll be having me for some bits of it, mainly because I personally prefer doing stuff with microeconomics. I'm not the biggest fan of politics and policy, but that's why I'll be with you for the microeconomics part of the of the course. Now, focus next term, the term after that, for some bits, will be on the macro scale, macroeconomics. Okay, so I've given you just a brief discussion on the branches of economics, but the important thing is right now we focus on the microeconomics, and next time we'll focus on the macroeconomics. So let's start with microeconomics. Now, approach that I'm going to do for this is we're going to build up um, bits and pieces, bits and concepts of microeconomics, so that you will be able to construct for yourselves what Robert Shiller, who was the 2013 Nobel Prize winner, said, perhaps the most famous image in all of economics. Now, if you've read through economics magazines or something like The Economist or something like that, or you've seen popular economics videos, you know this. It's this graph right here, demand and supply curve. So this is a very important this is a very important picture. And again, as Robert Schiller said, and personally I would agree with him, this is perhaps the most famous image. Like, when you say economics, this is probably the first thing that comes into people's minds. All right, so let's have a further look into this. So we've got two curves here, really. So the first curve is a demand curve. All right, that is what we will be doing for this series of lectures. And then the next series of lectures, we will be doing supply. Okay, so that will be the next series of lectures. And finally, we'll be tying both of these together in the next series after supply, and we'll be talking about price. Okay, how is price determined based on demand and supply? Okay, so we'll be dealing first with demand. So we'll be building up this picture. We'll be deal first with demand. I introduce to you the demand curve, then the supply curve, and then we bring it all together. So we now have the supply demand curve. All right, so that's how we approach it. Okay, book definitions, just to get it out of the way. I know, because demand is something we do have an intuitive sense of what it is, but here's a definition. from your textbook. So the demand is the willingness to buy a particular good or service. However, we often refer to quantity demanded, like how much of a good will be demanded by the consumer. So that's usually how we used to how we quantify demand. Okay, so economics, it's a bit mathematical. There's a bit of numbers in it, but don't be afraid. We're going to take it through you slowly. But so that's why the important thing is right now is to understand that when we say demand, um, what we mean by that is the quantity, the amount of good that is demanded. All right. So I hope that's clear. So let's have a case study on cow's milk, and we'll be using cow's milk. And note that I particularly use the word cow's milk, okay? Because for reasons you'll understand later. And we'll be using this throughout the whole demand series, okay? And I will explain at the end why I've chosen to use cow's milk. Your textbook uses mobile phones, but there's a reason why I've opted specifically not to use mobile phones. And I'll be explaining that in the final lecture series for this one, okay? But for now, we'll be doing cow's milk. So, what determines the amount of milk a family will buy? Or in economic parlance, what determines the demand for cow's milk? And let's have a look through it, okay? We've got different factors. First of all, a family might just like it. Surely, if let's say you've got a family of 5, and all of them want to buy milk, of course it's going to influence how much milk they're going to buy, compared to say if they're all if half the family is lactose intolerant, right? So this is what we call preferences and taste. If a certain family likes to drink milk, then they will probably buy more milk. Simple enough, I think. There's also advertising. So let's say this is from Dairy Farmers of Canada. So this is an advertisement for milk. So of course, sometimes this influences us. So we want to get more milk because suddenly we got this craving for milk based on based on adverts, right? So that's another way that could influence the demand or of how much milk a family will buy. You also have stuff that you could go with milk. Let's say you've got a bowl of cereal. Like, let's say you've got not bowl of cereal. Sorry. Let's say you've got a box of cereal at home, and you've got plenty of those boxes of cereal, and they're going out of date. And then you're thinking, well, kind of want to eat this, right? Rather than spoiling it, but you don't want to just eat cereal on its own, or even worse, use water. No, please don't do that. So what do you do? Well, sometimes that might influence you to buy more milk so that you can have something to pair with your cereal so you can finish your cereal, right? So that also influences how much a family would buy, how much milk a family would buy, right? There's also substitutes. So the reason why I said cow's milk is because there's more than one type of milk. Nowadays, especially as veganism is on the rise, and so people are looking for substitutes to cow's milk. You've got almond milk, you've got soy milk, and you've got all of these kinds of substitutes. So if somebody, for example, buys almond milk, they're probably going to buy less cow's milk, right? Or even no cow's milk. So the amount of cow's milk a person or family would buy also depends on whether or not substitutes are available. I hope that makes sense. There's also, of course, how much money the family is making. Of course, if you've got more money to spare, you've got more money to spend, your income's higher, you probably will be more liberal about buying milk. You probably won't hesitate. You probably won't hesitate to buy more milk because you've got more money to pay for it, right? So that's also another factor that determines how much milk a family would buy. Of course, also you've also got population. How many people are in the family? Okay. Or here, how many buyers will there be if you want to consider the milk market as a whole? Surely, if you've got a family of 6 and they all like milk, then they'd buy more milk than say a family of 3, even if all 3 of them like milk, unless family of 3 really likes milk that much. So the size of the population also determines how much milk a family would buy, right? Or a market, the demand for cow's milk. And finally, the most obvious one is the price. Thing that goes without saying. The cheaper the milk would be, the more milk you could buy, and probably that might actually influence how much you buy. Okay, so these are some of the reasons some of the factors that determine the amount of milk cow's milk that a family would buy, and the society as a whole. Now, summarizing what we did from our case study, okay? So the quantity of milk that a family demands depends on several factors. So again, first of all, we got the price of milk. That was the last one we've seen. And you've also got the income of family members. So how much money they're raking in. So, the more money they have, the more liberal they'll be with buying milk because it will feel like it doesn't um, cost that much to them. And you've also got the price of related goods. So we got cereal, again, which is what we call a complement, because because cereal goes with milk, right? So they usually go together. Or a substitute like almond milk, which is again another a different kind of milk, which you could use as a substitute for cow's milk. And of course, we've got taste and preferences, whether or not you like milk in the first place, or even if you're lactose intolerant, will influence, right? You got the number of people in the family, you've got advertising, and you've got expectations. Now, expectations, we'll go about this later on in the module. But for now, just remember these are what determine the demand of milk. Now, we had this in the production module. The word phrase depends on, right? Do you remember another way that we could represent this phrase? Something a bit more mathematical. Give you a moment. Hint, it's already in the slide. Right. We use the word function. Right. So whether it's mathematics or whether it's in physics or whatever, function just means to depend on. Okay. Now let's make this a bit neater because there's a lot of words. Let's make it all in symbols. All right. Okay, so these are the symbols that we have for each of the factors at play. Don't worry, we'll be revisiting this, so you don't have to memorize what these symbols mean. But I hope at least they give you a good picture to make things less cluttered. Okay. So again, we say the quantity of milk, of cow's milk that the family buys depends on price, income, other goods and related goods, the taste and preferences, the amount of people they have, adverts basically, and expectations. Now remember, the function we could represent it this way. We could say that let's just use this one as the quantity demanded for cow's milk is depends on. Okay, remember whenever you have equals f, that just means is a function of, but literally that just means it depends on. Okay, so it depends on all of these factors put together. All right, so again, panic. All right, so in the production module we'll be taking a ceteris paribus approach. So again, just as a recap, as a revision, what is ceteris paribus? That means all other things being equal. That means we will be taking one factor at a time and then seeing what happens to the quantity demanded when we change that one factor. Well, the rest will keep the same, okay? And we'll be doing this throughout the, the module. So let's just go about the road ahead. Basically, this is I end this part of the module here, this part of the lecture here, and so we will first consider the effect of price on demand. Okay, so again, ceteris paribus, we would only consider what happens when we increase or decrease price, what happens to the quantity of milk demanded. We won't consider, we will assume everything else stays constant. Okay, then we focus on the effect of other factors, similar to what we did with the production module, isn't it? As bonus content, though, we discussed two limiting factors. And again, this isn't in your textbook. This is something more as a, it's closer to the type of economics that I like to talk about. So there's, first of all, there's information asymmetry and there's human irrationality. Okay. And again, there's a specific reason why we are using milk for our analysis. Okay. Because remember that whole rational thing, there's it breaks down quite quickly, okay? Especially at some other markets like jewelry or even mobile phones. All right, but I'm getting way too ahead of myself. That will be for the later part of this module. All right, so thank you for listening, and you'll hear from me in the second part of this module. And here are just some image credits.